of any kind of prosecution because someone violated that 2,500, you know, footage in terms of staying away from the daycare centers and all of that?
Well, first off, I haven't read the ordinance, so I'm not sure of all of the proponents. I've been briefed on some of the conditions of it. Let me say this. Ordinances are not necessarily criminal. They can be. So if somebody violates an ordinance, it might be a violation of the ordinance, but not a violation of criminal statute. And so we wouldn't typically get involved. If we have an agreement with the city, and well, most of them we do, to prosecute ordinance violations, especially if they have criminal penalties, then we may get involved in that. So I'll need to take a look at that ordinance before I could answer your question more fully about whether or not we get involved in that. Does it have an impact, or do people change? Let me say this. There are certain types of crimes, Gwen, like if you've got a 16-year-old having sex with a 15-year-old. That's a lot different than having a 40-year-old having sex with a 15-year-old, or a 30-year-old having sex with an 8-year-old. I mean, the true pedophiles, the people that are attracted to and molest and sexually assault small, what I call prepubescent children, kids under 12 years of age, I don't believe that for the most part that they're going to change. It's almost a sickness with them. Whatever it is, they don't. I said this the other day in the I guess it was the press conference. Leopards don't change their spots. These folks typically reoffend. That's why we have the Jimmy Rice Act, Win. That's why when people are getting out of prison, we can still keep them incarcerated or locked up in a mental health facility if they have if there is a substantial likelihood they'll go out and do it again. And so those laws are there for a reason. They're there because the true pedophiles, the people who are attracted to children, who molest children, who assault children, they typically don't stop. So I think that you have to evaluate the circumstances. I mean, a kid can get charged, a 17 can get charged with having sex with a 15-year-old. Is that the same? Is that a pedophile? Well, you know, maybe not. If it's a 6-year-old, well then we certainly got a different scenario. But they're both violations of the law. So I think we have to exercise common sense, good judgment, and always the safety of the child comes first.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me just say that you're listening to Truth with Gwen Azama-Edwards. This is Goliath, WLE Radio, 1380 AM on your radio dial. And my guest, of course, is our state attorney for the 7th Judicial District, and that's R.J. Larizza. And as I have said, he is running for office again. You know, you have been speaking, R.J., just, I think, from your heart. And in terms of what you really and truly believe. I mean, you don't make this stuff up, right?
No, you don't see any script in front of me, Gwen. I'm almost as good as you are, but not quite. I'm very comfortable. We're lucky to have someone like you out here on the radio, and I'm sure your listeners appreciate it. I'm just happy to have the chance to be here with you from time to time.
Thank you, thank you. I do appreciate that, and I do hear that a lot, that people feel comfortable. You are really a great, great guest, and I really and truly appreciate everything that you have shared. Now, there was an article in the paper, and I know Joy Alexander weighed in on this. You weighed in on it, as did the sheriff, and it had to do with pretrial intervention.
The pretrial services program?
Yes, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Explain to our listeners the importance of that and why it's being talked about now. Is it a funding issue? Is it, you know, what makes it really something that we should all kind of take a listen and watch and be attentive to what's happening now?
Yes, ma'am. The pretrial services program is a program for when people are arrested, they go to first appearance. If they don't bond out, the judge considers what the prosecutors say, the public defenders, and pretrial services is there to recommend bonds. So a lot of times a judge can release somebody on the low bond or on the no bond, but they have to report to pretrial services. Pretrial services can have drug screens conducted. They can make phone calls, verify where these folks live, keep tabs on them. If they make new law violations or they violate the conditions of their pretrial release, pretrial services monitors that. Think about this for a minute. Probation and parole monitors people put on probation, but they have to enter a plea and get sentenced to probation first. With pretrial services, when they're released, if you're released on the bondsman, and the bondsmen provide a valuable service, don't get me wrong, but they are not necessarily going to scrutinize what a person does to the extent pretrial services will, especially if the judge orders it. So it provides some supervision and some accountability to these folks before they ever enter a plea. And that's an area that hadn't been covered in the past. So from that public safety perspective, it enhances public safety. From a cost perspective, yes, we pay pretrial services to do the job. Yes, it's taxpayers' dollars. But what is the cost for someone to sit in the county jail day after day?
Absolutely.
It's more. And our jail, as you know, can get overcrowded very quickly, even though there's several hundred people can be housed in there. So I believe it saves money because we get people out of jail that don't need to be there. If they've got lengthy records, if they're in there for a violent crime, then the likelihood they're not going to get pretrial release, like in that sense. There'll be a bond and be a high one if they can make it. So I believe it saves money, it enhances public safety, it holds the defendants, the suspects, the accused accountable. So I think it's a good thing, and I think that all of us benefit from it. And I believe I don't believe it's going away. There's been some bills introduced in the legislature to water it down, to say that and I'm trying to remember. The main thing was, I think it had to be, there was a certain restriction about who would be eligible for it, which would extremely limit when it could be used. The judges like it, Gwen. We like it. The public defenders like it. It's a good thing. It's good.
Okay. Is there something that those who are listening who can do actually to ensure that it is, it continues to be funded, continues to be in place? Should they just let their legislators know that they support you guys on that?
Certainly, if anybody who's inclined and to reach out to any of our delegation, I do believe we've done a resolution, or the county council did, with the support of myself, the public defender, the sheriff, Ben Johnson, the director of public safety. A lot of different folks weighed in, the chief judge. If a bill is introduced during the session in January, or through January through March, then we'll start reaching out to folks and say, write those letters, make those phone calls.
Speaking of that too, how much involvement do you have to have, do you feel you need to have really with the legislative delegation and the like? Because there are a lot of people I'm sure who think, okay, he's state attorney, he does the job, he just sits there in the office kind of, and that's what he does, and you're saying you let your staff take care of different stuff. So how do you go about intervening in terms of that kind of legislation? Is it similar to what you're just saying that is happening with the county council, where you guys actually came together, you're working together to ensure that the legislative delegation and others know how you stand on particular things, or do you could personally actually get involved, or both?
I'd say both. And one of the beauties, one of the things I love about this position is that I have the ability to interact and communicate personally, one-on-one, and with several of our legislative delegation. And that's rewarding because, one, for budget. I've got 200 and something employees, and their livelihood depends on our funding. So that's one thing. I can actually have an impact or a say on the budget process in Tallahassee. That's big. The other thing is laws, substantive laws. I go to Tallahassee. I've testified in front of committees about laws. I've testified in front of the Clemency Board about laws. I've testified in front of the Parole Commission involved regarding the parole system. So that the ability to have that voice, to have that opportunity to make a difference, to make justice a reality, I truly enjoy that. And I think it's incumbent upon me to do that. I was recently elected treasurer of the Florida Prosecuting Attorneys Association and will eventually be president.